Hey, welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans, for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, July 21st, 2024. And folks, Big Ten Media Days, which is now a 3-day event, starts in about 48 hours. That's this coming Tuesday, July 23rd. We are now less than 2 weeks away from the start of fall camp, which begins on August 1st. And we are only 41 days from the Buckeye season opener against Akron on August 31st. Now, as is already very well documented, both on this podcast and anywhere else you get your college football news and information, the expectations for the 2024 Buckeyes are through the roof. I mean, well beyond the normal hype for any upcoming season. Ohio State is expected to be number 1 or number 2 in the very first AP Top 25 rankings, which will be released in 22 days on August 12th. As we know, guys like Fox's Joel Klatt, ESPN's Greg McElroy, The Athletic's Ari Wasserman all have Ohio State number 1 in their preseason rankings. They are just a few of the experts who are saying it's natty or bust for the 2024 Buckeyes. Now, as we sit here, only 11 days from the start of fall camp, I've been thinking about what are the missing ingredients, from the last few seasons that the Buckeyes must have in 2024 in order to fulfill these lofty prognostications. Now, we know Ohio State has been very, very good the last 3 seasons. They were number 2 in the college football playoff rankings heading into the Michigan game each of the last 3 seasons. They were undefeated, 11-0, heading into that game both last season and in 2022. But as Ohio State fans are painfully aware, the Buckeyes have not been able to get over the Michigan hump the last 3 years. Clearly, something's been missing from this program, I'd say probably since 2019. And I think it comes down to 2 major areas, one on each side of the ball. These are areas that have become relative weaknesses, I think, both by the program's own standard and the standards of the teams that this program aspires to be. And I'm talking about college football playoff title winners. Those areas are, first, on offense, running the football. Second, on defense, making plays behind the line of scrimmage and forcing turnovers. Now, I know I spent a lot of time talking about the latter category here on this podcast. I've been talking about the dearth of havoc plays on defense probably for the last 18 months. And again, by the way, havoc plays are defined as sacks, tackles for loss, and turnovers. I know I've been talking a lot about that these last 18 months, 2 years. I'm going to try not to repeat myself too much on that topic today, but it does bear repeating if we expect Ohio State to win a national championship this season. But I first want to start by talking about Ohio State's struggles in the run game over the last 3 seasons. I've done a little research, and I have to say, after digging into some of the historical numbers here, I did not realize until now just how far below the standard Ohio State has dipped at running the football. Now, if you compare the last 3 seasons, going back to 2021, to where the running game was under Urban Meyer, the contrast is very stark. Now, under Urban Meyer, Ohio State averaged 3,339 rushing yards and 36 rushing touchdowns per season. Under Ryan Day since 2021, those numbers have dipped to 2,217 rushing yards and 25 rushing touchdowns per season. I mean, that's a difference of 1,100 rushing yards and 11 rushing touchdowns per season under Ryan Day since 2021. And I think last season in particular, the running game hit rock bottom. And here's why I know that, because I went back and I looked at Ohio State's rushing total since the beginning of the John Cooper era, which was in 1988. Now, Ohio State, as a team, ran for only 1,805 yards last season. And let me put that number into context for you. That means the 2023 Buckeyes were one of only 6 Ohio State teams since 1988 to rush for less than 2,000 yards. And over that same span, since 1988, only 3 Ohio State offenses, 2003, 1988, and 2004, were less productive running the football than 2023. Wow. Also, last season, Ohio State averaged only 4.2 yards per carry in the run game. That's tied for the 6th lowest per carry average among Buckeye rushing offenses since 1988. Also, last season's 20 rushing touchdowns are tied for the 7th lowest among Ohio State rushing offenses since 1988. Those numbers are pretty bleak, I got to say. I mean, when you consider how much talent there is on this Ohio State roster, or how much talent there's been over these last 3 years, where Ohio State has been competing, perennially up there in the top 2 or 3 of the college football playoff rankings late in November, it's staggering that they've been that bad at running the football. Now, to be fair, injuries have had a major hand in the lack of production in the running game over the last few seasons. TreVeyon Henderson has missed 8 games because of injury over the last 2 seasons. Same deal for Mayan Williams. He was their leading rusher in 2022, but Williams was injured during fall camp last year and never really found his footing. The Buckeyes only got 49 carries from Williams last season before he was shut down for the rest of the year. Now, I think we also have to weigh the fact that we are in the golden age of the quarterback and receiver at Ohio State right now. Ryan Day has taken the passing game to heights the program has never before seen. Only 7 quarterbacks in program history have thrown for more than 3,000 yards in a season, and 5 of them were coached by Ryan Day. J.T. Barrett, Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, C.J. Stroud, who did it twice, and Kyle McCord. I mean, before Day arrived in Columbus, Ohio State had not had a quarterback taken in the first round of the NFL draft since 1982. That was Art Schlichter. But since 2018, the program has had 3 quarterbacks drafted in the first round, Haskins, Fields, and Stroud. And the program has had 4 receivers drafted in the first round just since 2022. Olave, Wilson, Smith and Jigba, and Harrison Jr. So when you're that good at those positions, naturally you're going to lean on your passing game. And there's one other variable that's worth mentioning here, and I'm leaning on some folks that know the game of football much better than I do, and that is predictable tendencies in the running game. Ohio State has some tells in the running game under Ryan Day that have made it much easier, I wouldn't say much easier, but easier to defend. For example, Day's tendency to run stretch into the boundary is something you're going to hear the film nerds talk a lot about. So you have a strong preference for throwing the ball under Ryan Day. You have injuries at running back, plus some very predictable tendencies, all conspiring to stymie the running game over the last 3 seasons. Now, it really hasn't mattered in the games Ohio State is supposed to win. The Buckeyes continue to mow down the Indianas and Purdue's of the world, and they continue to handle their business against the Penn States and Notre Dames, too. But against the very top-tier matchup opponents in the biggest games, namely Michigan, but I would also point to Georgia in the 2022 playoff semifinal, Ohio State's inability to impose their will running the ball has cost them. Meanwhile, in those very same games, their opponents have been able to run the ball effectively and make timely plays, and those were the difference in the outcomes of those games. Now, we know what the end game is for the 2024 Buckeyes. I just mentioned it. It's natty or bust. The Ohio State beat's going to tell you that. The national pundits will tell you that. So everyone agrees that's the trajectory for this team. And if that's the trajectory, if that's the goal, then Ohio State has to commit to running the ball like a title-winning team. And what does that look like? Well, let me tell you, because I went and looked at the rushing totals of the 10 national champions of the college football playoff era, and the numbers are they're lofty numbers. The average number of rushing attempts of a CFP title-winning team is 576. Under Ryan Day since 2021, Ohio State is only averaging 440 rushing attempts. The average number of rushing yards for a CFP title-winning team is 3,026. Under Ryan Day the last 3 seasons, I just mentioned it, that number is 2,217. Finally, the average CFP title-winning team finished with 38 rushing touchdowns. Under Ryan Day since 2021, the Buckeyes are only scoring 25 rushing touchdowns per season on average. So the assignment for Ryan Day and Chip Kelly is a much bigger commitment to running the football than what we've seen these last 3 seasons, and last season most especially. And again, what does that look like? We're talking about an extra 150 rushing attempts. Probably. We're talking probably an extra 800 rushing yards and an extra 13 to 15 rushing touchdowns. That's what previous title-winning teams in the CFP era has shown us. You have to be in the neighborhood of 575 to 600 rushing attempts in a season. You have to be over 3,000 rushing yards, and you have to be in the neighborhood of 38 to 40 rushing touchdowns and a per-carry average of about 5.2 yards. Now, here's the good news. Ohio State has the personnel in TreVeyon Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, and Will Howard to hit those numbers. And they have an offensive coordinator in Chip Kelly whose running games have been elite everywhere he's been in his career. Okay, let's flip over to the other side of the ball and have a look at the other major missing ingredient for Ohio State over these last 3 seasons. And again, I know I've been bitching about this nonstop for the last 18 months. And of course, I'm talking about havoc plays or a lack thereof. And again, what do we mean by havoc plays? These are plays made behind the line of scrimmage, quarterback sacks and tackles for loss, and takeaways. I'm talking about turnovers. Now, since 2021, if you compare Ohio State both to itself and to the teams that it wants to be, which are CFP title winners, the program has not made nearly enough havoc plays. First, I want to establish a baseline by looking at the program's own historical numbers in this area. Now, since 1979, that was the start of the Earl Bruce era, Ohio State defenses have averaged 32 sacks, 86 tackles for loss, and 27 takeaways per season. Now, I do want to note something about that takeaway average. 27 takeaways per season is a ton. Now, as a program, Ohio State has been very good at forcing turnovers over the decades. Now, you could also consider that a pretty big indictment of Big Ten offenses and a Big Ten quarterback play if, Ohio State is averaging that many turnovers. But those are the numbers. Those are the numbers we've come to expect from the average Ohio State defense since 1979. I'm not talking about exceptional. I'm not talking about great, merely average. 32 sacks, 86 tackles for loss, and 27 takeaways. Now, since 2021, Ryan Day's defenses have been just barely above the program average of 32 sacks at 32.7. They've been below the program average of 86 tackles for loss, averaging only 80 tackles for loss since 2021. And Ryan Day's defenses since 2021 have been well below the program average of 27 takeaways, averaging only 16 per season over the last 3 years. And last year in particular, Ohio State only registered 11 turnovers. 11. And I said this a few pods ago. I went as far back as 1970 and could not find a Buckeye defense that forced fewer than 11 turnovers. So, similar to the Ohio State running game last season, the Ohio State defense, as good as it was in many other areas, I think it hit rock bottom last year when it came to generating havoc plays. Only 28 sacks, which was the lowest output by a Buckeye defense since 2016. Only 72 tackles for loss, which, not counting the COVID-shortened 2020 season, was the program's lowest total since 2012. And as I mentioned, they were probably wearing leather helmets the last time a Buckeye defense forced fewer turnovers than last year's defense. I also looked at where all 10 of the CFP title winners finished in havoc plays, and I want to spare you the suspense. All of those teams had impactful defenses that made a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage and forced turnovers at a much higher rate than the Buckeyes over these last 3 years. The average CFP title winning team averaged 43.5 sacks, 104 tackles for loss, and forced 25 turnovers. So my challenge to Jim Knowles and the Ohio State defense, as good as they were last season, they need to add a minimum of 16 sacks to their total from a year ago. They need to add 35 more tackles for loss, and they need to double the number of takeaways from a year ago. 11 turnovers just ain't going to get it done, right? Last season, Michigan forced 27 turnovers on their way to a national championship, which included 2 against Ohio State that were the difference in that game. The last time Ohio State won a national championship, which was back in 2014, Darren Lee had a scoop and score against Michigan that put that game away. And in the CFP semis against Alabama that season, Ohio State had a pick six and an interception on the goal line that were the difference in that game. Now, the Buckeyes forced 33 turnovers that season in 2014. 25 of them were interceptions. Look, if you want to win a national championship, as a defense, you have to do more than just get off the field on third down. You have to be able to both make plays behind the line of scrimmage and force turnovers, especially in big games against matchup opponents. And look, the defense just has not been championship level in this area over the last 3 seasons. The period, full stop. Now, the good news is, just like with the running game, Ohio State has the personnel to create more havoc plays this season. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum. This is a veteran defense. There's NFL talent at every level. They're heading into year 3 under Jim Knowles. You've got the best free safety in college football and Caleb Downs patrolling the back end of that defense. You have corners in Burke, Igbinosun, and Hancock who can hold up in man coverage. That should allow Jim Knowles to take more risks and bring more pressure on opposing quarterbacks. Look, it has to happen. It's an imperative. This is what previous CFP title-winning teams have shown us. You can't win a national championship in the CFP era without making plays behind the line of scrimmage and forcing turnovers at a high rate. Period, full stop. Okay, so this is what I want you to take away from this pod. And I know I've thrown a lot of numbers at you. In 2024, the Buckeye offense needs to have over 3,000 rushing yards, 38 to 40 rushing touchdowns, and a per carry average of about 5.2 yards. And the defense needs to turn in 45 sacks, over 100 tackles for loss, and create 25 turnovers. Those are the key benchmarks for this season. If the Buckeyes meet or exceed all those numbers, they will win their first national championship since 2014. Mark those words. Okay, that's going to do it for me. Paige, Chad, and I will be back with another pod sometime after Big Ten Media Days and within the first week or two of fall camp. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.